About a week ago, I was building this slide deck, and this slide in particular, I was sitting in a hotel lobby, and I hear this woman's voice say, "Neither does mine." And I look up, and it's this beautiful woman in this ridiculously short skirt, and she just winks at me and smiles and walks away. And so now I'm a little worried. All of you guys sitting here, I'm wondering how many of you are expecting a very different kind of talk than the one I'm about to give. So bear with me. I'm going to start with a story. I can't help but pace, so bear with me. Also, I really like audience participation. I've been an interactive storyteller for so many years, so as you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand and ask anything you want. If we save all the questions until the end, then someone asks something obnoxious like, "What font did you use in that deck?" And that's the only thing anyone remembers from the whole thing. So, you really like Arial Bold, isn't that interesting? Please, by all means, ask lots of questions. So the story I want to start with actually is I was at my parents' house for dinner, and my mom throws these huge dinners. She invites friends and family and neighbors over, and I sat down next to this guy I've never met before, one of my mom's neighbors, and I introduced myself, and he said, "Oh, you're Elan. I've been so excited to meet you. I think I need your help. Your mom tells me that you," and I'm going to pause here, because this is important. This is my mom, not the one with the freakishly large head, the other one. She tries so hard to understand what I do for a living, and I've explained it to her over and over and over again, and it's a tough one. It used to be really easy when I was working at the Xbox the first time. It was simple. I built video games. She could brag about the fact that I built video games. All she really wants to do, she's a typical Jewish mom, she just wants to brag about her successful son, and I make it harder and harder and harder for her with every project I try. And we have this discussion over and over again. She says, "So you still build video games?" And I say, "No, I build alternate reality games." "Well, that's still video games." "Well, no, it's video games, but there's puzzles." "Oh, so you build puzzles?" "No, okay, so they're sort of like, imagine a movie, but with a puzzle element, and there's computers involved," and I realize I'm confusing her already, but she finally says, "Oh, okay, I get it." And I say, "All right, can you say it back to me?" And she says, "Well, you build movies, but they use computers as well." And I think, okay, good enough. I'm going to be happy with that. So now we'll go back to that night. I'm sitting down, sit down next to this guy. I've never met him before. He says, "Oh, you're Elan. I've been so excited to meet you. I hear your mom tells me that you build computers." Right. Now, this isn't her fault. And the reason that I want to talk about this is because I've been a storyteller for a long time. I really believe that stories can change the world. And the more I can get my mom to understand what I do for a living, I feel like the better able we will be to tell the world what this is, how we're getting a little bit closer to more immersive storytelling, how we're kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit. And it's so hard for the world to put this in a box, to understand exactly how it fits, what it is. I'm sure all of you guys are working on really interesting, really creative projects, but it's so hard to explain why this is new, why this is interesting. And so I thought what I would do today is talk about myself, my own journey through this, and some of the things I've learned along the way. So first we're going to talk about the problem. Whenever I design a new project, I start out with a really simple story. It usually starts on a computer, and then it gets a little bit more complicated as I try to figure out which devices I want to use for that. It gets more complicated still when I think about extended devices and a TV network and email systems, and more complicated still when I'm talking about the real world and GPS and all of this social network insanity and circle of friends. And then to make matters worse, we throw these terrible titles at the thing. Anyone out there who has the word transmedia anywhere in your title, you have made a very poor investment in cardstock for your business cards. It's not going to last. I really think that we need to simplify this. We need to clean this up a little bit. So I want to talk about three main things today: titles, conduits, and audiences. Titles are going to be the way that we talk about this. Conduits are going to be the method by which we tell our stories, and audiences, of course, are the people that we tell these stories to. So let's get started. Titles. I think we should start with this. For you guys who don't know, this is a horseless carriage. The reason it's called a horseless carriage is because they used to have carriages. Carriages had horses. You remove the horse, and suddenly you've got a horseless carriage. This is a terrible title because you and I don't know this as a horseless carriage. We know this as a car. But it didn't start out as a car. It started out as a horseless carriage. It had a long way to go before it became a car. It was just a horseless carriage. The reason it was a horseless carriage is because when you invent something new, oh my goodness, the internal combustion engine is going to change the world forever, but we don't know how to talk about that yet. So we take something really old, horseless carriage, we apply it to something new, the car, and what we get is a title that doesn't quite do it justice because we don't know the right title to apply to it yet. Okay, what's this? Yeah, Charlie, that's what's in the box. What's the box itself? YouTube? Anyone else? Any titles for this? I think I heard it. Internet video, I think I heard somewhere out there. An internet video. Another terrible, terrible title. The reason internet video is a terrible title is because it's taking an old thing and applying it to a new thing. Here we have the invention of the internet, this unbelievable method by which we can deliver stories into every single home. But all we have is video to apply that to. These things that come through antiquated systems into our houses, we plug it into our TVs, we watch videos. But here we have this new thing, so we'll take the old thing, video, and we'll apply a new title to it, internet video. It's not quite right yet. We haven't quite arrived there. I don't want to say that it is the responsibility of everyone in this room, of all content creators and inventors, to come up with the names for this stuff. But it is our responsibility to be restless about it and to feel uneasy about it and to keep churning at this stuff because we haven't quite arrived yet. I'll give you another example. My father runs an antique store, and every once in a while he calls me up and says, I just got an incredible treasure that you've got to come and look at. In this case, he had a first edition print of Robinson Crusoe. This is 1719 by Defoe. This was amazing because it's the first work of fiction in the English language, and I love this thing. What was most amazing to me, though, is you open the book, and on the first page, there's something that only ever appeared in the very first print of the book. The editor believes this thing to be a just history of fact, neither is there any appearance of fiction in it. On the very first page of this book is an outright lie. This is a work of fiction. This is the first novel. The problem is he doesn't have a term for that yet. It doesn't exist yet. So what he does is he takes an old thing. Publishing exists. They make Bibles, they make periodicals, newspapers, print, things like that. But there's no fiction yet. So he just sort of takes the old thing and plugs it into the new. And it doesn't quite work, and so he has to lie about it. He has to tell us this thing, no, it's all true, it's all true, it's all real. I didn't make this up, because that doesn't exist yet. Yeah.
What about Chaucer? And what about Shakespeare?
So,
The first novel, it's not the first piece of fiction.
absolutely. So in Western theater, the question was about Chaucer and Shakespeare in the theater. In the theater, they had a whole different work of it. I'm referring to Shakespeare, I'm sorry, yeah. With every form of media that comes up, every form that evolves, they all struggle with this exact problem, and they all have to fight with it in a very different way. I love this example because, oh my goodness, on the first page is an outright lie, and I think that's so charming, and we have so much to learn from that. I haven't dug into Chaucer yet, I apologize. Shakespeare I could talk about for ages because he was very guilty of all the same things, and guilt is even the wrong word. He was just trying to struggle with the emergence of a new form of media and unsure about what kind of terminology to use. All right, let's keep moving. One final note about this. It's okay that we haven't arrived yet. It takes a long time when we talk about a novel. From the invention of the printing press to the novel, the invention of a motion picture camera to this new term, the movie, television to sitcom, these things take an awful lot of time. They take a lot of tinkering and a lot of experimentation, and we're not quite there yet with whatever this new thing is, but that's okay too, because we're going to get there. It's just going to take us a little bit of tinkering. Let's talk about the second point really quick, because once we have a way to talk about this, once we have the title, then it's all about conduits. It's all about the stories we want to tell. And I'm very, very excited about conduits. I'm a really simple storyteller at heart. I like picking one thing that can get a story out to a whole lot of people. And I call that thing the conduit. It's the mechanism by which the story is told. Let me give you some examples. I worked on this project, Liz referred to it earlier, for Halo 2. Microsoft called me up and asked me if I could help them with the marketing for for Halo 2. And me and my team created a project called I Love Bees. Here's how it worked. Microsoft called up and they said, we want Halo to be huge. And I said, it's already going to be huge. You've got nothing to worry about. And they said, no, we want it to be a cultural event. And I thought, all right, it's a story about aliens invading the Earth. You want it to be a cultural event. This has actually already been done before. Orson Welles, War of the Worlds, already been done. So let's just steal from the best, because that's the best place to start. And we wrote, directed, edited, and distributed a radio drama, cut up into little pieces about aliens invading the Earth, set right in the world of Halo, except instead of delivering it over the radio, we used a conduit. In this case, it was payphones. And we used tens of thousands of payphones all over the world. You're walking down the street, a payphone rings, you pick it up, a little bit of story gets delivered. This woman on the other line screaming at you, oh, thank God you answered the phone. Please, whatever you do, don't hang up. Listen, they're on their way there right now. You got to burn the documents. And suddenly pulling you into this strange story, trying to make the story more immersive than stories really ever have been, at least over payphones, but through a conduit. What we started to see when you use a conduit like this, which inherently implies that people have to leave their homes, they have to work just a little bit, what you start to see is that each of these payphones becomes a story in itself. People started forming parties. They started dressing up in costumes. They started bringing props. They made up songs. They made up chants. They became friends. We got wedding invitations from this thing as people started to use this story, to fall way, way, way deep in the story, because it was told in a way that let them live in that world. And this was the power of that conduit, one of the first examples I'd ever come across. And I got so excited about this new method by which we could tell stories. I'm going to tell you one of my favorite examples of this. There's this one payphone that we would ring every single week, and no one would answer it. And it was in a state in the United States, I think it was Tennessee, and we really wanted to get people involved there. It was the lowest participating state, and there was this one payphone. It was in the lobby of a Wendy's, a burger joint in Tennessee. And every week we would call this thing, and no one would answer. And one of the things that we kept doing to make these stories more immersive is from time to time, instead of a recording that you'd hear on the phone, we'd put a live actor on the other line. And they would play with you and scare you and challenge you to do things, and all of these interesting invitations for the story to become more immersive. And I really wanted the live actor to be on this Tennessee call because someone was going to answer it in this lobby of the Wendy's. And no one ever did. Until the very last week, someone finally answered the phone, and it was this very hesitant woman, and she answered the phone and she said, hello, Wendy's, can I help you? And I realized this isn't a player. This is an employee. Someone who works at this burger joint has answered the phone and has no idea what she's about to get into. And I considered hanging up the phone, but our actress jumped on without missing a beat, and she screamed into the phone, "Soldier, who is the enemy of all mankind?" And this poor woman, caught completely off guard, just doing her job, the phone's ringing, she answers it, she pauses and she says, Burger King? It was great fun. Let's talk about another conduit, books. Books have always been very immersive, and I've always been so fascinated with them and wanted to kind of tinker around a little bit with what happens when you use that conduit to become even more immersive. What happens when things come out of the book and live in the same world as you do? And so the keynote speaker last year, Sean Stewart, who's my creative partner, we wrote this book called Kathy's Book. And it's the story of an 18-year-old woman who she writes this journal. And you might know a little bit about it, but what I want to tell you is a very interesting story that happened. First, a little bit of background about the way the book works. As she tells you the story of this extraordinary thing that happens to her, she'll say things like, "Oh, I'm so pissed off at my boyfriend. He's such a jerk. I never want to speak to him again. I'm going to go home and tear up his picture." You turn the page of the book, and his actual torn up picture falls out of the book. You can put that picture back together, and suddenly you get to see what the dude looks like. Turn that picture over, and on the back is written a phone number, which you can actually call. If you're really clever, you can actually hack into his voicemail and hear all of the incoming calls as well. It's this story that about a character who lives in the same world as you do, and in doing so, uses the conduit of a novel to become even more immersive. Now, this is a really scary thing. I always get nervous about introducing fictional characters into the real world, because when you do we're really nervous about that phone gag, because when you introduce the ability for players to hack into a voicemail system, you always run the risk of all you're going to get is like some old dude breathing heavy into a microphone. But it turns out we didn't get that. What we got was a bunch of people opening up to Kathy, telling her their problems, asking to be friends. And this never became more clear than when we made a Facebook page for her. And on Facebook, when you sign up a character for Facebook, a real person for Facebook, you have to make up a birthday because you have to tell them when they were born. And so we did this for Kathy. Kathy is a fictional character. She doesn't actually have a birthday, but we invented one for her. And on her birthday, something amazing happened. Someone friended her and wished her a happy birthday. And we thought that was really cool until a few seconds later she got another one, and I'll bet you know where this is going. By the end of 24 hours, her site was inundated with these birthday wishes. These were real people wishing a fictional character happy birthday. A fictional character who doesn't have a birthday. This doesn't happen for other fictions that you can't live in. Nobody calls up Luke Skywalker and says, "Hey dude, sorry about your hand." You don't live in the same world as those worlds. But here was suddenly using a conduit, this novel, and you could live in that same world and you could touch it a little bit, and it became so real and so beautiful. I should say there's been 2 sequels and movie rights and all kinds of New York Times bestseller, international bestseller. Sean likes it when I say all that stuff, so yeah. Edoc Laundry, another really, really fascinating conduit. And this one I'm particularly proud of. When I say that stories can change the world, this is the one I most adore pointing to. Edoc Laundry was a clothing line. And these were just shirts and hats, all kinds of stuff that we would all feel really proud wearing in public. But here's the trick. Each shirt in the line had somewhere in it a secret code or hidden message embedded in the shirt. To figure out what the secret message was, you had to fold a shirt in a certain way, get it hot, get it cold, get it near another shirt. We used thermal inks, infrared inks, glow-in-the-dark inks, all kinds of secret stuff. And if you could figure out what a shirt said, you'd go to the website, enter in the code, and a movie would start playing. We made a lot of movies. We made one movie for every shirt. And as you started watching these movies that fit together like a puzzle, you would learn a story. And it was a story about a girl on the run from the law and a crime she didn't commit, and only you can save her. Before you know it, you're knee-deep in a murder mystery story told exclusively through clothing. Want to know what happens next? Awesome! Go buy another shirt. This whole thing rolled together like a TV series. And I did it because of this guy. Bear with me. It was really fun to start a clothing company. It was really fun to use clothing as a conduit. But really, I did it because the second time that George Bush was elected, my friends were furious. They didn't like his first run. They were really upset that he got back in office. And I would ask them all the same question. Well, fine, who did you vote for? And the answer was always the same: I didn't vote. And this was so infuriating to me because we have these rights. We have a voice. And none of them were using it. They were just complaining about it. So I started a clothing line. And what that means is, remember I told you it's a story about this girl who was committed, she was accused of a murder that she didn't commit. And she's a member of a band. And you learn the story about this band who one of the band members was murdered. Lynn, the producer of the band, was the one on the run. As the players started to unlock this story shirt by shirt and piece this thing together, what they started to realize was that there was a metaphor going on. Each band member was actually a placeholder for an important person in the United States history. And they actually learned the story through these shirts of the Founding Fathers. And they learned the struggles that these guys went through, and that they weren't happy with the way things were going, and that they could have a voice through their music, and that they could change the world around them. And without us ever telling anybody this, without us ever hitting it over the head, they started forming rock the vote parties and get out the vote, and they went door to door, and there were blog entries, and they built media. And the next election for my demographic was the largest turnout in the history of the United States. And I like to take 100% full credit for that. But it does go to show that anything as simple as a t-shirt can also be a conduit. It can tell a story, and it can be really, really immersive if you can figure out the right way to do it. I have one more example. Actually, I have two more examples. This is by Campfire Media, Byzantium. For anyone who hasn't tried this site, you must go to this site. You know those personality tests you've taken in magazines or online? They tried to use a personality test as a conduit, and it was so cool. You go onto the site, they put a bunch of posters all over New York City to advertise the site. You'd go onto the site, and it would start asking you the most bizarre questions. Things that didn't make a lot of sense. It was very, very easy to play. You would click on an image or two. It would get weirder from there. It eventually tied into your Facebook account and started showing you pictures of friends from your actual Facebook account. And then at the end, I'm intentionally blurring this out, something crazy happens. And I'm not going to tell you. You have to go to the site and check this thing out. But you should know that it starts to elicit responses like this. These are actual Twitter responses. I just grabbed a bunch of really random ones off the net. But a personality test telling a story, a conduit like that can elicit this sort of thing. I really highly, highly encourage you guys to all check this out. They're going to go fast now. It just goes to show the power of picking a good conduit, having a very, very low barrier to entry, and then pulling audiences into that story. Okay, this is actually the final one. 9 Inch Nails. Actually, let me go back here. Trent Reznor, lead singer of 9 Inch Nails, called me up one day and he said, I've got this new album called Year Zero, and it feels like the soundtrack of a movie. And the movie tells a story of a dystopian future. It's about 30 years in the future, and we have no civil rights, and the government has taken away everything, and religion plays too big a part in government, and it's this awful, awful time, but I've written all about it in the lyrics to the song, and it feels like it ought to be a movie. The problem is I don't have a movie, I just have the soundtrack, and can you build that movie for me? And we started talking about Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club, and we started talking about Pink Floyd, The Wall, and we started to realize that a rock album as a conduit for storytelling is magnificent. There's so much cool stuff you can do because there's so many aspects of it. Everything from the little government warning on the back of a CD. I'm sure you guys have seen this. It basically says, don't pirate the CD. Ours was a little different. Ours said, be a patriot, be an informer, rat out your friends, and a number you could call. And that was kind of weird. People sort of scratched their head, what the hell's going on there? It got even weirder. You know when you look at a computer representation of audio, it's just a crazy zigzaggy, blurry line of, blurry line. Ours, you'd actually see images appear. A crazy disembodied hand reaching down from the sky, or a phone number that you could actually call. We even went so far as to embed things in the actual disc. The black disc on the left is the disc you would buy. You'd open the CD case, inside is a black disc. It says Year Zero on the bottom. Put that disc in your CD player, listen to it for a bit. When the disc comes out, a different CD comes out of your CD player. This white one with secret codes, messages imprinted all over it. The way we did that was just a thermal ink. The heat from the CD player would burn away the black and reveal all the white ink underneath. This was an incredible conduit. We had people all over the world engaged with this thing. The deeper they went, the more they would get rewarded, the more they could get immersed in the story, and the more they could participate in the actual story. One of my favorite stories about this was our finale. The question was, how do you end something this big? And we thought, well, we got to end with a live concert. Certain players who found a secret in one of the songs knew to show up at a certain intersection at a very certain time. About 50 people were there. A black van pulled up, threw out 50 cell phones all over the ground. Everyone grabbed one with instructions, keep this thing charged, keep it on at all times, then the van sped off. A few days later, the phones rang and told them to show up to this parking lot in the middle of the night, and these guys actually did it. They showed up in this parking lot, a bus pulled up, all the windows blacked out. Everyone was escorted on the bus, closed the doors. They have no idea where they're going because the windows are blacked out. We drive around the block, all over downtown LA. We take them to an abandoned warehouse. We corral them all inside this warehouse. A curtain falls. There's Trent Reznor, 9 Inch Nails on stage playing a private concert just for 50 of them. How do you end something like that? Because that's pretty spectacular. Nobody gets that. So we thought, all right, best way to end it, one of the walls blew up about 10 songs in, SWAT team came pouring in, firing automatic weapons, throwing concussion grenades, screaming at the top of their lungs. Everyone freaked out, ran back for the door where the bus was waiting for them, corralled on the bus. Except for 3 guys. 3 guys stood there like this. And they're, as a SWAT guy firing a weapon is running towards them, these guys are just standing there like, what are you going to do? I know this is fake. So that's a problem. So one of the SWAT members grabbed one of the guys, pushed him up against the wall, punched him in the face, blood splattered everywhere. He fell on the ground. 3 other SWAT guys came over and started kicking the crap out of him. The other 2 guys turned completely white, ran for the door, and got on the bus. He was a stuntman. We planted him from the very beginning. Specifically because kind of figured something like that would happen with 9 Inch Nails fans. This does not in any way relate to conduits. I just really like that story. So what about when they go wrong? What about when you choose the wrong conduit? You choose a way to tell a story that's just way too complicated. I'm going to tell you one of my favorite stories. I'm not going to tell you the name of this game because, to protect the innocent and all that. There was a game where players had to reconstruct a machine. There were bits of actual metal buried all over the world. And one by one, they'd find these little bits, put them back together to construct a machine. Every few weeks, they would find another one. And the game designers realized that they needed a little bit of a break. The players were moving too quickly. And you can't kind of say time out in a real world game like this. So what they did was they used a brand new conduit that no one's ever used before. They used Antarctica. Antarctica is very tricky. You can only travel there 6 months out of the year. So what they did was they got themselves on the very last boat to Antarctica, traveled out there, took the piece, buried it in the snow, took the GPS coordinates, ran back to the boat, got on just in time and went back. Now they told the players exactly where the piece was, knowing that they've got a 6-month break. This can go one of 2 ways. Either the players can wait patiently 6 months, or they can say, this is a bullshit conduit, we're going to hack the system, which is exactly what they did. They called up the US Naval Base on Antarctica, and they got in touch with a very nice research scientist, and they said, listen, would you mind going out to these GPS coordinates with a shovel and digging and tell us what you find? And this nice woman said, I literally have nothing else to do, so sure. And so she went out there, and she dug, and she found the piece, and she came back, and she said, hey, I found a weird piece of metal. And they said, great, we know meteorites hit Antarctica all the time, and you scan them in with a 3D scanner. Would you mind scanning in that piece? And she said, sure. And so she scanned it in, and she sent it to them, and they printed it out in metal, and they kept going with the game. Except there was no more game, and the whole thing fell apart at that point. And the important lesson here is you've got to pick your conduits carefully. Too high a barrier to entry, really bad. Too low a barrier to entry, no one pays any attention. Just right in that sweet spot. And you can tell incredible stories that will pull audiences in. And I bring this up because next I want to talk about a time last year when I picked a terrible conduit. But this is all about audiences. Third and final point here, audiences. My journey's been 15 years long. I've tried a ton of different companies. I've built really, really successful, popular things. I've won a bunch of awards, but it's never quite felt mainstream. I think we'd all agree, nothing yet has ever, in this field, has really ever been mainstream before. And I started researching a new personal hero of mine, Giuseppe Verdi. Italian composer, huge feud with Wagner. And this was really interesting. They were both very prolific music writers, but Wagner wrote books as well. And he was so outspoken, and he had theories about everything. And once he published his Theory of the Theater, and it was much hullabaloo, and the press was all over it. And one reporter actually went to Verdi and said, Wagner has just published his Theory of the Theater. Do you have a theory of the theater? And Verdi paused for a moment and said, yes. The theater should be full. I love this. For me, this is exactly what comes next. I've done all these really interesting things, but it's always kind of felt like the theater has been half full. I think it's time to reach a much larger audience. And before I tell you exactly how I'm going to do that, let me take a step back. Last year, I opened a TV studio, and we made a whole bunch of projects. that were kind of like TV, but they used TV as a really interesting conduit. They made it so that as you're watching a TV show, if you see a character on the screen who takes out a phone to make a phone call, the next moment the cell phone in your pocket is going to start ringing. Characters could send you text messages or emails, or they could meet you out on a street corner. They could do everything that TV could do, plus they lived in the same world as you. Now, this did pretty well. We made a whole lot of shows. One of them even won an Emmy, which was really fun. By the way, really easy for my mom to brag about that. But the conduit, I feel, was wrong. It was too high a barrier to entry. When you watch TV, you don't want to enter in your cell phone number in order to watch a TV show. You don't want to enter in your email address. You want to sit back and you want to watch TV. And it took me a second to kind of wrap my mind around that and figure out that I had picked an inappropriate conduit. So then the question becomes, well, what comes next? What comes next? For me, the Xbox. This was really fascinating to me. The Xbox has 40 million units out there. I just took a job there because 40 million units. If you start building original shows for the Xbox, overnight, you become the largest television network in the world. So when they told me they were interested in building original shows, I said, that's great, largest network in the world, but that's not good enough. That's actually not the right conduit yet. If you use the Xbox and first you acknowledge that there's a controller that people are holding in their hands, and it can synchronize with your smartphone, and people are using their smartphones while they watch TV anyway. And there's gesture support and voice recognition and social network support, and all of these elements that can make it a little bit more interesting, provided that you don't get in the way of good TV watching. Suddenly this becomes a really, really interesting conduit for me, a really interesting way to tell stories. I actually built a whole big slide build-up for ways to tell this exact point, and then I thought, wow, this seems a lot like a cheesy commercial. So I thought instead, I'll just show you pictures of puppies, because that doesn't seem at all like a commercial. The point of all of this, though, just to recap, we talked about the titles, we talked about conduits, we talked about audiences. So let's bring this all back. How does this come back to my mom? Well, I actually went to her with this deck, and I told her this whole thing and this whole journey and everything that I've been thinking about, and especially all about my new job and what I want to do there. And she said, so you're back to making video games? I said, no, now it's more like I'm making television. And she said, wait a second, you're making television shows? And I said, well, they're television shows, except I'm applying a hardware and software model in order to make TV even better. And she said, okay, I get it. And I said, really? Can you like state that back to me? And she said, you make TV shows, but you fix them to make them better. And I thought, okay, great. Yeah, I'll take that. That's maybe as good as I'm going to get. So now let's go back to that night. Here's exactly as I imagine it going. I sit down. My mom's got a big dinner going. There's friends, family, and neighbors there. I sit down next to a guy I've never met before. I sit down. I introduce myself. He says, oh, you're Elan. It's such a pleasure to meet you. Your mom tells me you fix televisions. I figure that's probably good enough.